I stand at the edge of forever, where the earth meets the sky and the ancient voices still whisper through the wind. Before there were cities of steel and glass, before the roar of engines drowned out the songs of the earth, there were the first peoples. They walked in harmony with forces we can barely comprehend. The Great Spirit who breathes life into all things, the thunderbird whose wings shake the heavens, the shamans who communed with the gods and danced between worlds as easily as stepping across a stream. These are not mere myths. These are not children's tales told around campfires. These are living memories of nations who understood that every mountain has a spirit, every river carries wisdom, every creature holds medicine. These stories are maps to understanding the very soul of this continent. But know this, as we enter this discussion of mythology, language, homelands, migrations, we do so with respect, with humility, and with the understanding that we are guests in traditions that have survived genocide, forced assimilation, and centuries of misunderstanding. We come not to take, but to listen, not to judge, but to learn, not to diminish, but to honor.
Welcome to another episode of the Charlie and Andrei podcast. I'm joining you here from Austin with a mustache.
The new and improved Charlie. Over here we got your boy Andrei over in Maryland outside DC, and today we're going to be talking to you about the topic of Native American language, families, cultural groups, mythology, migrations, and things like that. It's a very ambitious, broad topic, but we'll try to kind of sum up some of the more interesting parts of it and try to cover a lot of the, like the bigger points. So I guess we've always both been interested in this topic for like a long time. Like uh, ever since like history class in like in elementary school, we've been exposed to like uh, all the histories of local tribes in the areas that we grew up in. For example, Texas. I think we both were children there. I unfortunately had to move out of the area. So I learned about the Apaches, the Comanches, all the different tribes, and then of course to the south you had the Aztecs and like because they were intimately linked with the history of Mexico, which itself had links with Texas. And then I later learned about the Iroquois Indians here, the Delaware, the Lenape in Pennsylvania in this area, and I guess. I started kind of getting more into it when I started realizing like where do all these kind of funny names for places in the US come from? Like a lot of these names don't have like equivalents in merry old England or in Europe, like Connecticut, Massachusetts, Mississippi, all these different places, like they come from indigenous place names ultimately. So uh, even though there was an unfortunate history in which these people were slowly kind of marginalized and and driven onto reservations or otherwise kind of wiped out in some ways, their legacy still kind of lives on in this country in many ways, and in place names, in cultural kind of memory, and even in the bloodlines of some people, actually. So we're kind of interested in how this all started, how these various language groups, evolved and moved all over the place. And yeah, I guess we can kind of get started on talking about some of uh, these
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, just echoing what you said about like Native Americans that we grew up around. Like I grew up in the Austin area in Texas, and there's like roads that are named after like the actions that the Comanches would take. Like there's a decently like important thoroughfare like Comanche Trail, and it's like mapped out along the river that used to flow before they dammed it up during the New Deal. But like Comanche Trail was the trail that the Comanches who would migrate on a regular yearly basis. And of course they lived in the area. And of course, if you see Westerns or if you read like Lonesome Dove, Native Americans play a role. And of course they played a role historically. And the Comanches would like migrate. And of course they had horses, which, before the Columbian Exchange, they didn't have horses, but they were sort of able to migrate a lot during that time period, given that they had horses. And of course, I love visiting like the Texas coast, and that's where like the Karankawa Indians were. And I guess there's less known about the Karankawa Indians, simply because they just were in that region there, Corpus Christi and kind of South Texas coastal region. But um, I've read this book, Empire of the Summer Moon, and it talked about the Parker family and how like these I guess there was like an intermarriage of like American whites with Comanche, and this lady grew up or spent much of her life living with the Comanche. And then her son, who was half Comanche, half white, ended up being like a big figure, for the Comanche, and ultimately lived, in Texas, effectively when the Comanche were wiped out. Like you said, many Indians were. Um, but I mean, it's a fascinating history, like the Iroquois Confederation up in like the Northeast, along the Great Lakes. And of course, in California, you have like these massive, like this awesome diversity of languages, everything from Uto-Aztecan to like the Yurok language to just like all this stuff along the California coast. And of course, it's such a fertile region, right? And of course,
Right.
where these language families showed up makes sense often, right? Like you can look at the Algonquin family, which you and I were talking about, right? Language family. It's crazy because it stretches all the way from like, um, you know, uh, the East Coast, but then it has like random little tidbits here and there, including in like Western California. So yeah,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, so yeah, you might kind of be wondering why these language families are so scattered, as opposed to being more like regionally cohesive. But it's just a kind of a testament to the um, deep and complex history of these Native American tribes, and like a lot of these language groups spread and established themselves far before the European Columbian contact of, 1492 or afterwards. So, what we're seeing left of them might not reflect the way they were, say, I don't know, 1,000 years ago or more. Um, so yes, there were migrations for various purposes, maybe famines, maybe climate and weather uh, related causes, drought, flooding, like natural disasters, tribal infighting, population growth. Um, in a lot of these cases where I've learned that there were probably once these kind of bridge languages that acted as intermediaries in a given language family that then later went extinct. So that's why you might have like one all the way out, west somewhere, and then most of them out in the East Coast because we kind of lost those like sort of stepping stones in a way. Um, but yeah, it is interesting because like the Algonquian family and the Algic family, they're mostly found in like the sort of eastern seaboard of the U.S., but then they randomly have this outpost in Northern California in the Yurok tribe. And then you
yeah.
also have a similar thing with the Athabascan languages, like another major group of Native American languages. They also have an outpost in the region. They're an interesting one in that a lot of them are in like Canada and the northern plains regions, but also I believe the Apache. No, no. I know that they contain the Navajo. So all these languages. Is it the
Yeah, it's like
Sweden.
Saskatchewan and
Yeah.
Manitoba and Albertan. Yeah.
Yeah. And then,
But they reach down, you're right, to the Navajo and the Apache in like
yep.
the down there. But there's like this massive disconnect. It's like what's going on? And they reach up
Correct.
all the way to, California base or
Well,
sorry,
no,
Alaska.
to Alaska, yeah, and
Yeah,
like
yeah.
they're related to the Tlingit people who are also known for their totems and special shamanry. This particular language group called the Na Dene family is fascinating in that it's actually purported it's the only New World linguistic group that has been shown to quite plausibly have a link with an old world language group in Asia, and it's not even in like the far kind of northeastern point of Asia or tip of Asia there in Siberia next to Alaska, as you might assume. It's actually kind of deep in like central South Siberia in like central kind of Russia.
It's crazy how far inland it is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's called the Yeniseian people. I think the last surviving language is called Ket, and they call this the Dene Yeniseian hypothesis. And these languages would have split like I don't know, like 8,000 years ago, something like that. So like they went in different directions a long time ago. Supposedly, actually, there was like three major waves in sort of the peopling of the Americas. There's the Proto Amerindians, which was the first kind of migrants to cross from Siberia across the land bridge of Beringia, is what they called it. So the Bering Sea at the time during the Ice Age was like solid land. They actually stayed there for like several thousand years. This was a very gradual process, and they kind of gradually moved southward into Alaska, Canada, and over the next like 1,000 or 2 years, they basically multiplied and peopled all the Americas, all the way from Alaska to the Tierra del Fuego in Argentina, which is a fascinating and kind of amazing like phenomenon. Um, and that was like anywhere from like 15 to 20,000 years ago. That was the first wave and the biggest one. Then came this supposedly Nod Dene or whatever family, which came like, I don't know, 8,000 or 10,000 years ago. And then finally came the Eskimo Inuit kind of family more recently, like maybe 4,000 years ago or so. And there's actually like two waves of that because like one the Inuit did displace the earlier Dorset Eskimos. I don't know. It's complicated, but um, so yeah, you have these kind of major waves. In some cases, these actually do correspond to certain genetic,
Like
markers.
haplogroups and
Yeah,
Y
and
chromosomes.
things
They
like
they
that.
they can
Yeah,
map it out
but
like
not always as cleanly as you would think because these
right.
people have kind of
There's a
blending
lot of
for thousands of years.
questions.
So it's not like a as simple as that. But it is fascinating how these language families evolve. Then you have Uto-Aztecan, which is like it has Aztec or the Nahuatl language that the Aztecs spoke, and a large portion of their languages are down in like set central and southern Mexico, as far down as like I think Guatemala and like El Salvador.
Yeah.
But then they have like this kind of northern branch, the Udo branch from like Utah, which a lot of linguists think is where they actually like started from, originated from, and then
Yeah, you
that
got
actually
like
kind
the
of makes sense,
Shoshone. Yeah, you have the
right?
Shoshone
Oh yeah,
tribe and you have the
the
Comanche, the
Shoshone is far
Hopi.
north as Idaho actually.
Yeah, Shoshone, yeah.
So, but like according to Aztec myth, like they came from further north in the Mexican kind of desert area and followed this eagle down to the Valley of Mexico where they founded their capital city of Tenochtitlan. So there is some, kind of corroboration of that in mythology and like origin story too. So pretty
Yeah, and
fascinating stuff.
it's cool that like the Nahuatl language and mythology would preserve that, and it's like symbolic and central to the story of Mexico. I don't think necessarily they came from like the Comanches. The Comanches, in my opinion, are like a later outcrop of people who like maybe crossed the desert or somehow came over
Right,
and just
right.
started migrating the plains. But yeah, you're right. They probably came from like the Shoshone region or like the Hopi or the Colorado
Yeah.
River area. Um, but of
It's
course,
another
like we
like
said,
Mhm.
California is so like vibrant. The temperature is relatively stable throughout the year, and you have like so many languages. I would say it's probably the most densely diverse part of like the United States in terms of like pre-colonial language families that we're aware
Yeah.
of. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, there really is. It's sad that a lot of them kind of got wiped out and are extinct now, but
Yeah, it is very sad.
yeah.
Yeah.
I
But I
mean,
mean, they
I think like
tried to,
sorry, go ahead.
no, no, you go, you go. I'm sorry.
No, just kind of about that. Like, weren't you talking about how like certain areas like climatically, like the San Fernando Valley, like in the south outside of LA area are like kind of conducive toward
Yeah, there's this theory in history, the struggle response theory of history, where like in order to survive in any climate, I mean you basically need a climate to survive in, but if it's too extreme, like the Sahara Desert or the Arctic, like a civilization can't really flourish there. Of course, in the Sahara there's the Nile, but that kind of like balances out the extreme. Like
right, right.
in the middle of the Sahara, yes, there are some Berbers there, but it's not like a massive civilization that's flourishing. So temperatures like the Mediterranean or mild temperatures where like England gets kind of like that nice rainfall from the Caribbean that comes over. Those and of course Mesopotamia, China, the Indus River Valley, like these aren't extreme areas, but they're not easy necessarily to live in. Um,
There's got to be that challenge, right?
yeah,
That
you need like a
causes
balance of challenge,
yeah.
but if it's too easy, then civilization maybe won't flourish. And one hypothesis is that California just had so much food just growing everywhere, and it's very much like a Mediterranean climate.
Yeah.
And in fact, if you read Herodotus, he says much of Greece was pretty fertile, but that means people were constantly fighting over it. I'm just using this as an analogy. And he said like the Attic Peninsula was the perfect balance of like it wasn't too fertile, but it wasn't too dry, and it had a good defensive position. So the Greek, and likewise, I think if you find certain areas like the mounds of Cahokia,
Oh yeah, the mound builders of the Mississippian
yeah,
culture. Yeah.
fascinating civilization there. Like they had the floods of the Mississippi, which presented some challenge. They had some probably some intense winters, but nothing like extremely crazy like you'd get in northern Canada. And civilization was able to flourish there. This is just
Right.
a theory. It's not necessarily, it's just the challenge and response theory
I
in
agree. I
history.
mean, and think about it like places like the Inca civilization and other Andean civilizations. I mean, that area was kind of, yes, some parts were fertile, but it was also challenging too. I mean, like a kind of arid and cold zones, uh, deserts, all kinds of stuff. So,
Yeah, yeah.
which
And
is
you could say the
actually
same thing about the Maya. Like the Maya were in a completely flat area, which was basically flattened due to the asteroid that destroyed the dinosaurs, right? And you have like all these little sinkholes, which were the
right. Yeah, those became the
after
cenotes.
effects. Yeah. And so the Maya, but they were in a jungle, so that's some challenge, but it wasn't like intense, weather constantly there. So they had water resources and underground rivers, systems, and they could survive and develop that
Right.
flourishing,
It was
beautiful
like
civilization.
just right, like
Yeah, and of course
right.
we did a podcast on Chichen
Right.
Itza,
So, yep.
so we're
Or
maybe deliberately avoiding that
yeah,
topic.
we're not going to go too much into depth about that, um but yeah, so let's talk a little bit about like kind of cultural practices and how they intersect with kind of mythology. So like one of the big themes of Native American I don't want to say like religion, but like beliefs is like a belief in sort of like a great spirit, right? Like this it's not the same thing quite as like a monotheistic God, but because they have like elements of animism and a lot of their gods are like kind of spirits of nature that are often represented as like animals, which is why totems are a big thing. I recently went to Vancouver. Well, I guess not too recently. It was like 2 years ago now, but and I got to see the Squamish tribe. They built a ton of these beautiful like totems, of like eagles and bears and and wolves and other kinds of animals, and they each kind of represented a different aspect of their mythology. Um, and of course, you have like the coyote in a lot of these sort of southwestern tribes. The thunderbird is an important, spirit. Snakes often have certain representations and connotations, of course. So it's kind of interesting just to kind of think about like how some of these things overlap. Like a lot of times, different tribes of different unrelated kind of language families have similar kind of mythologies of them starting from like an underworld, like the people emerge from the underworld into the world as we know it, as like an origin story, and they were guided by spirits and whatnot. So
Yeah, it's fascinating to look at these like Native American religions. Like you said, there's a lot of animism and pantheism. And often you have like these common themes across tribes, which can like come in the form of like a sacred circle, or there's trickster figures, right? Which you often see as like a coyote or a raven. And like you said, there's like the underworld, which is sometimes balanced with like the sky and birth and death and things like that. I think often, especially in certain regions, like if you look at a map, you have like the Northwest, the Northeast. That you can have like the Southwest Plains will have, like focus a lot on the coyote, and that makes sense, right? In that area, and the
right.
Pacific Northwest will focus on the raven. Um, and it's interesting because if you look at like their creation stories, you could I mean, from a Cloud Levi-Strauss perspective of structuralism, maybe you can like construct like this overarching theme from an anthropological sense of these Native American mythologies and religions. Um, and maybe you could even connect it with like in the same way that there's comparative mythology and religion, you could see like, well, look, this Northwest tribe has like twins in their creation myth, and look, the Proto-Indo-Europeans reconstructed myth has twins in theirs, and
Mm,
therefore like there's something to be said about overarching structures and like
right.
you said, I mean, often it's like based on reciprocity and like relationship building, which fundamentally is an economic analysis. Like, we have to go to the next tribe and bring them gifts because that means they'll come to us and give us gifts. And that'll build mutual relations for, the functioning of our society.
Oh yeah. Yeah, like a lot of these things have roots in actual practical kind of real life, tribal relationships and in a broader way, just human kind of relations. And I think that's why a lot of these things, yeah, are so universal. It doesn't mean that necessarily came from like a common culture, but they kind of arose naturally and independently in like a variety of these places. So yeah, like the whole tri-functionalist thing. I mean, that can be applied to varying extents. All these cultures. I mean, at least the Mayans and certain others.
Well, I mean, the theory, and I mean, yeah, referring to Georges Dumézil's trifunctionalism, I think I have his book, a couple of them on my shelf over there. But yeah, I mean, the idea is that scholars, especially after Dumézil, would argue, well, yes, this is good and it applies to Indo-European mythologies, but we would argue that it applies in general to other mythologies as well, because you do have like the sovereignty, which is the sacred king function, and you do have like the warrior function, the fertility, productivity function, and I think you could identify certain mythologies, like whether it's in like the Lakota or the Iroquois, of course, like you said, the Maya, and it's not just the Native Americans. I mean, maybe you could go back to Siberia as well, like we were saying,
Yeah.
and maybe those mythologies, which I'm unfamiliar with. Um,
They do have a lot of overlap in terms of like animism and things like that, and nature spirits and like motifs. Heck, they even use like kind of tent and teepee like structures and similar in parts of theirs. So you see some broad, similarities, and some of it might be coincidence, like parallel evolution. Some might be a deeper link.
Yeah, I mean, and maybe it's just like I think the conclusion might just be like, well, this is humanity, and humans come up like the Navajo have hero twins, and the
Right.
Proto-Indo-Europeans had hero twins, and it's like,
Yeah.
well, is it because they're related? Probably like not culturally or linguistically, but maybe it's just we're humans and we have these
Yeah.
overarching constructs, and it's
Yeah.
worthwhile to investigate that, and because it'll reflect on human consciousness as well.
Absolutely. And speaking of the Proto-Indo-Europeans, they also were a fan of migrating a lot, which is why you see a lot of these kind of disconnected little like language groups all over Eurasia and stuff. So it's not like the Native Americans were the only ones who have these kind of distributions, all over the place.
Right, right, yeah. And I mean, it
Um,
makes sense. Like you had mentioned that the Siberian language maybe was separated by 8,000 years from Native American languages.
right.
I mean, that makes sense because aren't there, in like central China, there's that Indo-European language that was discovered,
Oh, well, there
uh,
was the Tocharian
the
language at one point,
Tocharian.
but
I mean,
that went extinct about like 800 AD or something. But
yeah, but I mean, okay, so maybe that isn't the best example, but there's other languages that have
yeah,
just
oh, there's definitely other examples,
separated.
and there are like Iranian languages in some parts of Western China and stuff. So yeah, I agree. I take your point.
Yeah. But of course, at the same time, a lot like we've been mentioning Algonquin and the Algic and the Uto-Aztecan families, but there are language isolates out there. Like the same
Yeah,
thing, Basque is
and
a language isolate.
actually, you bring up an important point. This is a controversial thing because, like, this one guy, this one linguist, I believe the name of Ed Greenberg, he tried to come up with this theory of like Proto-American, like all the languages of the Americas of the native peoples of the Americas, except for that special Na-Dene family and the Eskimos. He tried to fit them all under one single proto language that would have been brought over across the Bering Strait, like over 10,000 years ago. And a lot of people rejected this hypothesis as being like overly ambitious, and it depended on a lot of coincidences or the inability to kind of tell if something was a loan word or borrowing or semantic loan versus actually coming from a mutual ancestor and inheritance. Um, and because of that, a lot of these kind of Native American language families are treated as like isolates essentially. Like they have their own like sub kind of units, but they're not kind of convincingly proven to be related to any others. So it's still an ongoing kind of matter of debate and controversy in linguistics to some extent, but
I
uh,
mean, but you see that often, like in Europe, you have
oh
the
yeah, yeah.
Basque language, and I think you have some extinct families in Europe, like Haddock and things like that. But if you look at Oceania, I mean, Oceania has a ton of these language isolates, and that makes sense because they're so isolated from each other. Uh,
Well, uh, Oceania, like a lot of them are Polynesian and Micronesian, and they do have a fascinating history. That's a whole nother topic and
another
get into. But
podcast, right?
I think the analog in the old world to this like theory is that of the Nostratic family, if you've heard of that. And then
Well, the Nostratic hypothesis, you mean that
yeah,
like Indo-European has common origin with
with like Uralic or Finno-Ugric and possibly what was it? Some Caucasian languages and I think even like so some of them included Afro-Asiatic as well, but
I mean, it's fascinating to, yeah, I think the Euroas, yeah, I think it included it because it was the Dravidians, it was the
yeah, yeah.
Afro-Asiatics, and yeah, it's fascinating basically to consider that all these languages have a common ancestor. And like as someone interested in linguistics, not even as like if you're just fascinated by linguistics, that's a really cool theory.
It's
Uh,
cool. I agree it's
but
cool,
it's
but it's
widely
also
rejected, unfortunately.
yeah, some people get a little excited about these things like, oh, let's try to connect everything. Now we got your Indo-European figured out. Let's do this. And like the whole Altaic hypothesis, which was once accepted, is now kind of falling apart, the whole like Turkic and Mongolian thing. So there's been more scrutiny kind of applied to these things. And I don't deny that they do have links. It's just that with the evidence that we have right now, it's hard to kind of definitively prove that. And there are a lot of kind of missing links that we will just kind of never know. So that's
Right,
the
right.
puzzle of historical
Or if we discover new
linguistics.
things. I mean,
Yeah,
it's
it's
like
possible.
Tokarian. We discovered
Yeah,
Tokar,
that's true.
and we might, break linear A Greek.
I someday, yeah, like
Yeah.
the Minoan, yeah.
So
But more thing was like, why do you think that like like the kind of Mesoamerican civilization grew to such a high degree of complexity and advances, and like kind of the people in most of the U.S. today did not quite reach that level of societal sophistication, like they just stayed at mostly the chieftain kind of level, maybe with the exception of the Cahokian mound builders, and maybe the Iroquois kind of got somewhere later, but not quite.
yeah, I mean, it's interesting, like because I mean, I don't know if we'll ever have like a firm answer. It's like it could be that challenge response theory that we talked about earlier. I mean, but
Mhm.
certainly, like you look at Palenque, Chichen Itza, you look at these cities, they built pyramids, observatories, things like that, and you look at these other people in what is currently the United States. I mean, effectively, they were semi-nomadic peoples.
Especially
Uh,
on the plains, right?
right, right,
And
yeah,
in
yeah.
parts of Canada too, like the
But
first
of course, you had like
nation.
Cahokia, like you mentioned, the Mississippian culture in Illinois and everything. But you also had the Pueblos people in like Chaco Canyon.
Right, and like
Right.
the Hopi, the Anasazi, they were a
Yes.
fascinating people who built like those houses into the cliffs and stuff, and then they
Right.
kind of
Right.
mysteriously just vanished and disappeared as a civilization like 1,000 years ago, something like that, and they haven't really been able to explain definitively why. Like,
I mean, it's been fascinating. Yeah. I mean, another explanation might be just simply because Mayans and the Aztecs and the Mixtec and the Zapotec were able to develop a writing system. And I
yeah,
know that
true,
some U.S. tribes, but they were primarily oral, and then like the law
right.
was
Oral
transmission through
tradition, like
memory.
the Cherokee, the Cree, like they didn't really
They
have,
did
like,
they did have like wampum belts and like birch
right.
bark scrolls and some like petroglyphs, but I think it wasn't a full script. It was more like pictographic type stuff.
Well, the Incas, I think they also I mean, didn't they communicate with a series of beads and things like that? And like they
Yeah,
had this
yeah, yeah, yeah.
kind of system of,
But then I think it's interesting. The Maya had like this extreme astronomical knowledge. I mean, I think
right, of
that's
course.
undeniable. I mean, they understood the
Yeah.
calendar. They had the base 20. They discovered zero as a concept independently. I would say that the tribes I would argue they had deep astronomical knowledge for sure. For sure. And like they understood the solstice alignments, you know what I mean? And like
Mm,
Cahokia and everything. But I don't think it was ever formalized insofar as we know into formal calendar.
right.
So
It
I
was
would say like Mesoamerican, back to your question, it was like systematized and institutionalized and
right, right.
yeah.
Out of necessity. I think the Olmecs are the ones that kind of kicked that all off. They kind of started that kind of Mesoamerican cultural, milieu, which was kind of later developed by, the Toltecs, the Mayans, the Aztecs, and so on. And of course, Teotihuacan and all. So,
I
yeah,
mean, it could also be like environmental factors. Like,
yeah,
I mean, in Mesoamerica, you have a lot of like squash and beans and maize.
and corn, yeah, corn or maize, which became, a huge crop like all around the world now, and like
Right.
tomatoes, of course, potatoes, like these which, yeah, it's a very fertile region. Not that's not to say that the U.S. is also not, or Canada, but
Well, but they had deserts, forests, right?
right.
And I think in general there was just lower population density.
Yeah, they didn't
Yeah.
quite get to that.
Yeah, and you could say it's like the chicken or the egg that leads to that, but I mean, it just there was lower pop, except in those exceptions, like the Pueblos and the Mississippians, or sorry, yeah, the Cahokians, right? And
Right.
then and maybe it's just like I guess once you start rolling, maybe there was like a state effectively formed in Mesoamerica, like you'd have Chichen Itza city
Right.
state and
Centralized like power.
bureaucracy or whatever, and Uh,
That makes a big difference,
I
obviously.
mean, but I guess you could say that they were confederated in the northern because you had like the Iroquois
The Iroquois
Confederation.
Confederation, which happened kind of in like proto like historical times though, like around the time that the Europeans were like already arriving. So who knows how that
Yeah.
influenced things.
But I would say like we are sort of approaching it kind of from like this structuralist perspective, anthropological, which is kind of Western. But I would say like the Northern, they had like deep ecological wisdom, like and environmental wisdom, and they had like immense spiritual depth in. And I sincerely believe this in the Northern tribes. And I mean, we get that even in like post World War II American culture. I mean, there's a revival of interest in these types of things, like Carlos Castaneda and
Oh yeah, yeah, that
uh,
was
his experiences in
fascinating.
Ottawa
Yeah.
and things of that nature. So,
I mean, and Native American languages have come into use in many unexpected ways. Speaking of, like in World War II, it was used, the Navajo language
mhm.
was used so that to send encrypted sort of messages so that the Japanese couldn't like, decipher or figure out like what we were saying or the Germans or whatnot. So, it's kind of fascinating how these languages are still kind of put to use in the modern
Yeah.
era. Um, but yeah, we covered basically all the big things.
Well, we covered languages and migration. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, there's like
so
so
much to
much
talk
that could be
about.
talked about. Like, I mean, this is like a massive topic, and um,
We might as well do a shout out that we went to the Native American Museum in Washington, D.C. together, and that's architecturally probably one of the coolest museums in D.C.
oh yeah, absolutely, yeah,
Yeah, very
they
cool
they did
design.
a good job there. Um, I also, yeah, in Canada too, they have a deep kind of respect for the first nations peoples, almost like more in some ways than they do here. And there's like tons of like museums and cultural exhibits and things like that to celebrate kind of Native American art and artists and their legacy and the story that they want to tell. And I've noticed that for firsthand in like sort of the Pacific Northwest region. So that, in addition to the museum here in DC, yeah, it was a fascinating
And
experience.
and I will say there are other Native American aspects in museums in Washington, D.C. Like in the Natural History Museum, speaking of which, you do have totems there.
All right.
And they have massive totems. I mean, you walk up the stairs and you basically spiral around it, and it's a very cool experience.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's been a little while. I haven't seen it in a while, but I need to go again. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
What was your favorite sort of part of it? Uh,
In the Natural History Museum, of course, I mean, there's all sorts of stuff in relation to nature, but I would say one of my favorite aspects is the totem because I find it to be fascinating from a psychological perspective. I mean, you can almost see like archetypal figures on each part of the totem. I think it's something that it's just if you observe it, it almost becomes meditative because you start thinking about it, and it represents, I think, different aspects of just life in general. I mean, I suppose that's one thing that it's meant to do, and I think the totem is fascinating. If you're referring to the Native American Museum in
yeah, yeah.
DC, uh, the one thing that we didn't talk about here is kind of like the whole treaty analysis and the kind of the unfortunate way a lot of Native Americans were treated. But it is interesting to see
Oh,
like
like the Trail of Tears
the
and
Trail of
uh,
Tears. Yeah, like even George Washington signed. They smoked peace pipes with the Native Americans. I think the Iroquois
peace
Confederation
pipe thing. Yeah,
has
yeah.
the
That
Seven
that
Years'
that's a thing,
War.
and they gave us tobacco smoking as well. So
Right,
that's a
right.
mixed thing, but it's a big impact on
Yeah, no,
world this culture.
it's fascinating. I mean, I do think that architecture of that museum of that Smithsonian is really cool. I would say like there's minor things in there that I really enjoyed. There was like little baskets and things like that, and kind of this cool, what's the right word, like regalia that
Yeah,
you would see on like horses and little canoes and teepees. I'm just seeing the pleasures of museums. It's just so
Right.
much to learn, right? I mean, what
We
about you?
know
What are your favorite parts there?
we both love museums, and actually we have like less than a minute left, so we do need to
Oh,
wrap
okay.
up. So yeah, that was like a very broad overview of Native American cultural and linguistic kind of groups. Maybe we'll do some more in-depth things in the future, but this was just sort of our introduction to it. We hope you guys enjoyed some of this discussion, and if anybody wants to discuss this more, just shoot us a message or whatever, and drop a like. Yeah, it's been the Charlie and Andre podcast.
Like, comment, and subscribe.
Yeah, see you guys next time.
See
Bye.
ya. Um, Long ago in Navajo mythology, there's a story of hero twins. And they're curious because many Native American mythologies touch on twin deities. And some people have drawn connections with like Romulus and Remus. Um, but in the Navajo tradition, there were monsters that roamed the earth, and making life unbearable for people, and there was a problem. And there was this woman named Changing Woman, and she gave birth to two sons, twin sons. There was Monster Slayer, and the other son was Born for Water. That was his name, Born for Water. And they were conceived by the sun. So you already see these magnificent mythological constructs here. And as they grew older, the twins saw suffering in the world, and they really tried to end it. They vowed to end it. So they journeyed east to find their father, who was the son, right? That's the guy who conceived them. And on the way, they faced trials, spirits, guardians, tests, tests of their strengths and will. And when they had reached the son's house, he doubted they were his children. That's interesting. So to prove their heritage, the twins passed through like boiling lava, these trials and tribulations, razor-edged hoops, deadly lightning, and they were unharmed. And at last, the sun acknowledged them and gifted them weapons of lightning and armor of the sunlight. So they had these divine tools. And with those tools, they descended to the earth and one by one destroyed the monsters. Yericho, the giant north, and Telichin, the rock monster eagle, and others who devoured the people. And in this sense, it's good to think of people in like capital P. You know what I mean? And so with every monster slain, balance was restored. That monster slayer became the warrior protector, while Born for Water became the wise companion, guiding with care. So together they brought peace to the world in this Navajo myth. And their story reminds the Diné that harmony is won with courage, wisdom, and unity. It's interesting because this myth mirrors into European twin patterns of divine origins, perilous journey, the slaying of chaos and the monsters, and cosmic restoration that we've talked about in this podcast before. Another interesting story that we talked about in this podcast was the Iroquois. And they had the story of Sapling and Finn. And the story goes something like this. It might sound familiar. In the beginning was the Sky Woman, and she fell from the world. She fell from the sky world, in fact, into this vast watery abyss. And the animals seeing her, they descend. They created a place for her to land. And they placed soil on a turtle's back. And that soil on the back of the turtle became the earth. So, Sky Woman, who had descended from the sky world, she was pregnant with twins. And in her womb, the brothers were already fighting. They were already like quarreling with each other. And one gentle and patient was called Sapling, and the other was violent and hasting. His name was Flint. Those are the two twins, Sapling and Flint. Flint burst from her side, and it killed her in the process. And the twins set about shaping the world. Sapling created the rivers, the trees, the animals, gentle order in the world. Flint was resentful. He made mountains jagged, beasts with fangs, thorns, and darkness. You can maybe think about this in the American Northwest, Northwest United States terrain that we're familiar with, like the northern parts of Appalachia, of those mountains that reach up to New York. And then but you can also think of Sapling. He created these beautiful rivers and trees and animals. So their cosmic fight was cosmic in nature, right? It's good versus chaos, light versus darkness and harshness. But neither is wholly evil and neither is wholly divine, right? Flint isn't completely bad and Sapling isn't completely good. So they fight endlessly. But Sapling won. But he didn't destroy Flint. So the good one, or the what we would consider the better, more good, won. And Flint was cast into the underworld, where he still stirs volcanoes and causes trouble. So the Haudenosaunee, they explain this myth as why the world is both beautiful and dangerous. It's crafted by two divine brothers. Remember, those two divine brothers were children of the sky woman who fell from the sky world. And because this world was created by two brothers, the divine struggle continues, right? We struggle with every storm, every fire, every new day. And again, this is a curious myth. It's creative and orderly, like Castor or the Vedic Yama, and and the other brother is destructive, right? Like Pollux or Yuma's shadow twin. So with this cosmic tension, they shape the world, and I think that's fascinating. And I just want to give one more example. The tribe in the Northwest Coast, in British Columbia especially, they had this story of a myth of a raven, who was central across many of the Northwest tribes, such as the Haida, the Tlingit, the Shishiman, and I think some others as well. And essentially, this embodies this kind of the raven and the light story. The raven embodies a dual role. You have the trickster and the creator. And while the raven isn't part of a twin set per se, he often opposes another figure such as himself, and represents this duality of creation and chaos. So even within himself, he has this story. So the Haida would say, in the beginning the world was darkness, right? Sounds familiar. And there was this greedy man, and he hid all the light in a cider box. And inside a longhouse. Fascinating image. But anyway, a raven is clever and curious. A raven, again, a bird, wanted to bring light to the world. And he transformed himself into a pine tree, right? Into a pine tree needle. And he floats on the water. Again, cunning, right? And clever and curious. And he floats on the water, and he floats into this water that the man's daughter drank. And she becomes pregnant. And the raven was born as her child. Again, fascinating imagery. The man loved this child and gave him many gifts, but the raven carried and cried until the man finally opened the box of light to calm him. And in that moment, the raven seized the light and flew up the smoke hole, remember, of that longhouse, and casting it into the sky. Excuse me. So he seizes the light and casts it into the sky, and the sky became the sun, the moon, the stars, and if that brought balance to the world, it wasn't just darkness. So, though the raven was mischievous, his trick gave us world to light. And so, while this isn't literal twins, this myth mirrors perhaps what we see in Indo-European mythology, this twin motif. And I would argue in like three following ways. You have duality in nature. The raven's a trickster and a hero. You have a cosmic function, right? Like the aspens bringing light and medicine, the raven brings light and balance. And finally, you have transformation. This is the third aspect. The raven shifts form. Much like Indo-European gods are known to be shapeshifters and exist in multiple states, like Loki, the trickster. So, again, duality in nature, cosmic function, and transformation. Mythology can bring so much to light about the world and our human experience in it. So thanks for listening to a discussion of Navajo myth and Pacific Northwest tribes and the Iroquois mythology.